Hello and welcome to Culture in Between, a podcast all about exploring the unique experiences of people who grew up in a culture outside of their parents' culture. We are your hosts, Alyssa and Brianna, and in today's episode, we are excited and honored to get to speak with Cepee, who has Iranian and Colombian roots. Cepee, welcome to the show. We are super excited to get to talk to you today.
I'm so excited to be here with you both. Thank you so much for having me on. Really cool. This is something different that I get to talk about. So I'm excited to be here today with you.
Yes, and we're so excited to have you. And just to give a little introduction that I wrote about Cepee, Cepee Tabibian is the founder of She Hit Refresh, an online platform that helps women age 30 and up to move abroad. And the She Hit Refresh community and content can be found on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and the She Hit Refresh podcast. Cepee herself has been featured as a move abroad expert in articles in Forbes magazine and the New York Times, among other publications. She has also written a digital book entitled I'm Outta Here, An American's Ultimate Visa Guide to Living in Europe. Perhaps most importantly, however, Cepee has inspired thousands of women, myself included, to pursue their deepest dreams and to, in her own words, not let a good life get in the way of a great life. Thank you so much for being here, Cepee.
Wow, what an intro. Thank you for that. I think that's the best intro anybody has ever written for me. So well done. I love that.
Well, I really do love you and your content, and I'm just so honored to have you here. I know we've already said that multiple times, but that was just what I wrote for you. I don't know if there's anything you would like to add about yourself before we get started.
Yeah, I'll just give a high level because I'm sure we're going to get into the bits of it and you have touched on a little bit, but I just want to say I'm a girl from Houston, Texas who somehow ended up with parents from Iran and Colombia and ended up in Spain. So I am all about this mixed cultures and embracing various cultures and also not feeling like enough of any, right, as part of the journey. So that's just a little bit about my background before we jump into it.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, you actually answered our usual first question, which is kind of like where you're from. But we also like to ask where exactly in their respective countries your parents were from. So can you share that with us?
Yes. So my dad is from Iran and he's from the capital. So he's from Tehran. And that's where he grew up until he was, I don't know the exact age, but he probably was 17 or 18 because he moved to the US to go to college. And then my mom is from Barranquilla, which people may know where Shakira's from. And my mom only lived in Barranquilla till she was 5 and then moved to the U.S. With her family then. So that's where they came from. And then, of course, they met in the U.S. like many of these very mixed culture unions do happen.
Yeah. It is always interesting how that happens. I was actually going to ask if you know the origin story of how they met in the U.S.
Yes, I'm so glad you asked. I love this story. And I would always have my mom tell me the story. Well, she would always tell it. She didn't really drink, but if she had a glass of wine, the story was coming out. So, and it was one of my favorites. So my parents met in WVU, so West Virginia University.
Wow.
In I guess it would be the late 70s. So not the most accepting place. I think, they talk about that. There was, especially for my dad at the time, there was a lot of political tension with Iran and the US. So it was kind of a heated place to be if you were different. But my dad got a scholarship to go to school there. And he had grown up learning English, but of course was not native. So he had to take English for students, right? Foreign students, so ESOL. So he signed up for that class. My mom also signed up for this class, but she had been in the US since she was 5. She was bilingual. She knew English, but she took this class because a friend of hers told her, hey, Maria, it's an easy A. Just pretend like you don't know. You're from Colombia. Take the class. So she took it. Long story short, the teacher put them in alphabetical order. Their last names, had them sitting next to each other. My mom didn't buy the book because she knew English. My dad had the book. And yeah, she just said the skinny foreign guy next to me. I would ask him if I could use his book. And that's how they met. But kind of like how the love story started was that summer, they both went to their respective countries to visit their parents, came back. And she was just shocked when she saw him at school after summer that he remembered her name and remembered her when she ran into him in the hall. And that's kind of where it started.
How sweet.
Oh,
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
so sweet.
It's always so interesting, like when the mixed cultures, kind of how they meet in the U.S. usually, and even with our parents, even though they're from the same country, they met here in the U.S. So
Yeah.
it's funny. Our parents are a small island in Jamaica. You think, okay, they have a higher chance of meeting there than they would in the
Yeah.
U.S. But it's very interesting to always hear how those stories transpire. So
Yeah,
Yeah. I love the origin stories. I always
Yeah.
ask people, how did you meet?
that is. I have another sort of origin story I want to ask you about, and that is about your name, because your name is pretty unique. And in all of your content, you kind of always say, my name is Cepee, rhymes with Peppy. And I assume you probably had to say that to people in real life as well. So can you tell me kind of the story behind your name, as if it has any roots to your Iranian background, and how you felt about your name growing up as well? Because it can be hard sometimes to have kind of a name that people aren't used to.
Yes, what a great question. Yes, so my nickname is Cepee, but my full first name is Cepee. So I just go by Cepee, makes it easier.
Yeah.
But it's it is an Iranian name, so it's actually quite common in Iran. The first time I went to Iran, I was 26, and it was the first time I didn't have to repeat my name, explain my name. People just knew it. So as you kind of alluded to, it was a struggle growing up with my name. And I guess I should back it up. When my mother was pregnant with me, she really liked the name Tatiana. I'm glad. I mean, it's a beautiful name, but I don't feel like it fits me. So I'm glad we didn't go with that. But my father and his Persian friends were like, no, she's not going to be Tatiana. We're going to give her a Persian name. And so they selected Cepee. My mom liked it. So it stuck. But growing up, I just went by Cepee. But of course, the way it's written, people never know how to say it. And as many people who have unique names know, once that first day of class and the teachers, calling out roll call, my name would always get butchered and people would laugh. And so it's always been a struggle. And of course, when you're little, you don't want to be different. And it was always embarrassing. And I remember I just wanted to be named like Sarah, like the pretty little white girl in my class. I wanted to be Sarah. I wish that was my name. But as I've grown older, obviously now I definitely have learned to love my name. I wouldn't want to be a Sarah. I'm glad that my name is different and it, has roots to my identity, my culture, my ancestors. So now I'm very proud of my name, but it took a while to get there.
Yeah, and you touched on that. Okay, you said you traveled to Iran for the first time at 26. So that's kind of leads into a question that we do typically ask, which is like, have you visited each parent's country? Sounds like you have for Iran. What about Colombia?
Yeah. So Iran, actually, I said my first time, but I probably should have said my only. I've only been once,
okay.
and that was when I was 26. Colombia, I've been a few times, but I didn't go when I was younger. And I grew up in the 80s, and so it was not the safest place. And so my mother wasn't going back, and she didn't have much family there. Most of her family had moved to the U.S. So I went to Colombia the first time in 2010, and I was 30. So there was, much of my life, I wasn't familiar with the countries that my parents came from other than, what they had shared with me, which in all honesty wasn't that much information. I always find that so strange how sometimes immigrants don't share a lot with their children about where they came from. But yeah, it was, it's been, and I've been to Colombia various times since then. So it's always it's a beautiful experience to get to see where my mother's from and see so much, I guess, similarities in culture and what I knew from growing up in my household. But also there's that distance to where there's things that you're discovering. You're like, okay, I'm Colombian, but I'm not that Colombian because I don't understand this or know about that, or I've never heard of this or never tried that food. Yeah. So it's a constant, like, ongoing discovery of your own culture.
Yeah, that's interesting, a statement you made about, like, sometimes immigrants don't really share the culture so much. I mean, I feel like for us growing up, I don't know if you got this, but we got some of the, like, when I was your age, we used to have to do this and blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's more from your dad's side because your mom migrated over when she was so young. But, we get a little bit of that, like, you should be lucky, first world child, a little bit, like, I guess some questions I kind of have is, do you speak either of the languages, actually? You do? Okay.
Well, no. I'm like, I like this question. But no. So I'm so mad at my parents. Again, another thing I just will never understand is my father did not teach me Farsi. My mother did not teach me Spanish. She tried to start when I was about 7, but I do remember being very resistant. Again, at that point, you don't want to be different. I was like, I not that I was like, I live in America, but I'm like, we speak English here. I don't need to learn Spanish. And also I think my parents' common language was English. So that's what they spoke at home. And unfortunately, that's what they only spoke with me. I wish they would have shared their language with me. I've learned Spanish living in Spain.
Yeah,
but I'm kind of the black sheep. Like I have more of a Spanish Spain accent where my family has a different accent. And so
I see.
Sometimes I'm a little like resentful that I have this accent. Wish I would have, my Colombian accent, but it is what it is. I think I will add though, I was fortunate enough to grow up around both languages. My parents' siblings, my parents were very close to their siblings and spent a lot of time with them and spoke in their native languages with them. So even though they may not have spoke to me, I was the only child for 8 years. So I was hanging out with my aunts and uncles a lot. Everyone was speaking that language to each other. And so I think I absorbed a lot of it just, by proximity of being there, hearing them talking.
And you might like maybe understand it better than you can speak it perhaps. Like maybe if you hear certain phrases, you can,
Totally. Especially, I realized that. I mean, I always knew I knew a little bit of Farsi, what they speak in Iran. Growing up, I could recognize some things my parents said, but it wasn't until I went to Iran that I realized how much I just had absorbed and understood without ever having studied the language. That was really interesting. But speaking is very limited when it comes to Farsi.
But can you actually go into a little bit more detail about that, about your visit to Iran and your visits to Colombia as well? Like, just what kind of feelings did that bring up, knowing that you didn't quite get as much information from your parents, but now you're actually in these countries, and you, in some way, I'm sure you must have felt connected that way. Just what was it like? What kind of feelings did you go through?
And for the first time, she said she felt like somebody could pronounce her name.
Yeah, that must have
properly.
been
So that's kind of a
so
unique, like, I fit a little bit. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think there's always that complexity of identities when you're straddling, cross cultures. So I went to Iran first. I was very excited, and that was more of a family affair. I went with my father and my younger brother and my younger sister. My siblings had been before with my dad. I think actually maybe 2 times. They went when they were quite young, but for me, it was my first time. And I was super excited, so much so that I even started taking Farsi lessons before we went, because I wanted to be able to at least understand a little bit, try to read some signs, just feel a little more connected. And that was such a beautiful trip. I mean, I got to stay 2 months. It was a 2-week trip for my siblings and my dad, but I stayed on longer. And I really got to spend time with family that I had never met before. I met cousins, at 26, I met cousins like basically my age that I had never met in person. And so it was just beautiful to meet more of my extended family, spend that time, but also have that insight into, I would say, where my dad grew up, but Iran changed so much since he left. So it wasn't exactly an insight to how he grew up, but at least, an insight, I got to see my grandmother's apartment. I mean, that was, I think a lot of people just take that for granted. I could see how she lived, where she lived, what she did on a daily basis. And I had aunts and uncles taking me to the local markets and just showing me around their cities and their country, because they took me to other cities and we traveled as well. And it was such a celebration. Every night there were parties. And in terms of Iran, I got to see kind of the complexity and dichotomy of the cultures. Even myself, having grown up with my father and his siblings, there was still a lot of Iran that I didn't understand, and a lot that I maybe knew from the news, which wasn't accurate. So just to see, maybe on the streets, you have to be a certain way, but at home, I mean, people, at least my family, were living very similar lives to how I lived in the US. So just to see things first-handedly and just spend that time. I think it's so unfortunate though, when you're young, a lot of times you don't realize how special moments are until they've passed. I think I have much more awareness now. If I did a trip like that, I wish I would have asked more questions, or if I would have documented more things. Like, I was just kind of there. But there's so many, when I look back, I'm like, wow, there's so much more depth I would have liked to have gotten from that experience. But I don't think I had the maturity to even know that I should have been using that opportunity for that. But yeah, incredible. And then Colombia, real quick, that trip I actually went by myself, but my grandmother had kind of bounced back and forth between the US and Colombia, and she was in Colombia at the time. So that was so much fun because I got to hang out with her and her siblings. And that was very cool because I got to see my grandmother in a different light, not only in her native country where, my grandmother always had a very thick accent and didn't speak English perfectly, but to see her really maneuvering through her culture with confidence and speaking with confidence, and just seeing her being a sister to her siblings when they were fighting or this or that. Like, it was just so fun to see her in a different light and just to get to, experience her country with her. So they were both, incredible experiences that I will cherish forever.
And not just going to these places, but maybe even before then, just growing up with these different cultures in your household, did that kind of spur your love of travel, your desire to move abroad? Like, you obviously have this kind of desire to know of different cultures and travel and be in the world. So did that kind of spur that on? Do you feel like that was part of the impetus for that?
You would think that's the logical, a link there, but it actually isn't. It's so funny how, I just didn't want to be different. Like, I knew I was different, and my parents would always say that, like, well, you just tell your friends you're different. If I wanted to spend the night at someone's house and I couldn't, you just tell them your parents are different. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like the uncoolest thing to say. I want to be like everybody. Why can't you be like all my other friends' parents? So it wasn't until actually high school when I met, when I befriended a lot of the exchange students or foreign students that parents had been transferred to Houston, and most of them were European, that really sparked an interest in maybe visiting them in their country. And when I did that, that's what kind of sparked this curiosity for what was outside out of the US. So unfortunately, you would think, my heritage would be a no-brainer to want to explore, but it actually was just like trying to visit friends. But I'm so glad that I did, because that really spawned my my wanderlust.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just our parents didn't let us sleep over at people's houses either,
maybe
and it was very annoying.
You get it. They don't trust anybody.
No,
I mean, it's probably a good thing, but it doesn't feel like, you just feel trapped.
You want to fit in.
Yeah,
you want to fit in. Kind of actually piggybacking on that theme, because you mentioned like feeling different, and your parents are saying, just tell them we're different. That's or otherness is how some of our other guests have kind of phrased it, has been a common theme as we do these interviews. You grew up in Houston, and we've actually had a guest that we interviewed who's Indian descent, who's from Houston, and said it's actually very, very diverse. I'm curious, like, what was it like growing up there, and how did you feel kind of being this mixed race kid?
Yeah, I think things kind of change. Like elementary school, from what I remember, and again, I grew up in the 80s, so Houston has changed a lot since then. I mean, Houston has been a diverse city for a long time, but I think diversity grew even more late 80s, early 90s. So when I grew up, I just remember a lot of my classmates were white Americans, and I really did feel different and really wanted to be like them. So much so, like, I can remember just like the standard of beauty in my little 5-year-old mind was that typical white American girl with the cute little button nose and the blue eyes. And I didn't have that. And I remember being aware of that. But I think once I got to middle school and high school, maybe diversity shifted, or also we moved to a different part of the city. So maybe I just was exposed to more diversity. And it really was like, we had Asian, South Asian, we had Latin American, people from all over the world, from Africa. And I just remember feeling very much like I identified with, children of immigrants, first gens, even if I didn't have the context or the vocabulary to really understand that. I always felt more comfortable around them, or kind of, just an affinity towards them. They also had very strict parents. Their parents also, wanted them, demanded that they got straight A's. They also couldn't go to sleepovers. Like, we just had so much overlap culturally that I felt very close to them, even though our cultures were different in many ways. And I think in high school, when I look back, like, it was very normal for me to have, my closest friends, kind of the friends that I hung out with. Yes, there were some, white American friends that I had, but I had, friends from my kind of my pack was from like Argentina, from India, our first gens, right? Chinese. We were very international, and I thought it was quite normal until I traveled to other cities or met other people's friends groups that were quite homogenous. So I'm glad I got to have that experience growing up, but it was different when I was little and a little more diverse as I got older.
Yeah, we were very fortunate. We grew up in Miami, which is pretty diverse, a very large Hispanic culture, obviously. But yeah, it's definitely when you kind of venture out to different areas, you kind of realize like, oh, okay, not everybody has it's kind of a mixed, like I don't know, like a what do you call it in New York, where everyone's the mixed
Melting pot. A
Thank you. I
melting
could not
pot.
think of the
Yeah.
phrase there for the melting pot. Thank you. Yeah, of cultures. And a question we do like to ask occasionally, just because, and we've got varied reactions on this, is did you ever get asked like where you are from or what are you, and how do you respond? Does that question, does it bother you, or are you kind of like it's whatever? We've kind of got we've had both sides of the coin there.
Thank you for asking me this question. This is like, I feel like this is such a controversial question for some people. Well, I mean, I think it depends how it's phrased. So I guess, just being from, having parents from different parts of the world, I am naturally curious to where people are from, right? Especially if I can see, like, if in my mind, I'm always like, oh, they look a little Iranian. I wonder if they're Iranian, or I wonder if they're this, or, and so I ask people, where are you from, or where are your parents from? What's your background? Not thinking that it's going to be an offensive question. But I do find that some people do get offended by it. So now I'm a little more careful. I mean, for me, it's out of natural curiosity. And also I take it that way too. Yes, growing up, people had always asked, where are you from? What are you? I hate the way that is phrased.
Yeah.
I know what people are trying to say, but it's a very ignorant way of saying it. So it feels a little offensive, but I try not to get offended. I just think they're curious. That's, I try like to, what is the phrase? I always assume positive intent, right?
Yeah.
So I think people are just curious. I get it. We are humans. We're curious, especially if someone looks different or sounds different. I think, you just have to be a little careful now how you ask, because it can be offensive to people, because some people are asking maliciously to find out, and they will judge you, or they're, going to do something that's going to make you feel bad. And so you have to protect yourself. But personally, I'm not offended. And I'm also very curious and love asking people.
For sure.
What about you guys? How do you feel?
Yeah, I know. It's funny as we do these interviews, because we ask these things, I have to remember, like, don't say the same thing you said in the last.
Right. Yeah. That's.
But I don't know. Brianna and I have very different experiences. I felt like I had a lot of cultural identity issues, and Brianna not so
as much. Yeah.
But I would get asked, and I used to like not like when I was younger. I'm talking like elementary school age. I think it was more asked like, "What are you?" That kind of thing. And our parents, my mom is pretty fair skinned. To us, my dad is like darker skin, and so like I think people saw the parents too, and I would get asked things like, "Are you adopted?" and things like that, where it's kind of like, you don't think of the color differences in your parents as a and so that you just learn at an early age, like, oh, okay, people are seeing differences when you don't naturally as a child. So I feel like stuff like that was kind of heightened earlier, or the differentness. But it didn't bother me early on, it did bother me early on, but now as an adult, it doesn't bother me. I think it's just curiosity. And I also assume positive intent. And I am curious a lot of times as well. And I think it all depends on how you ask it, and it's coming from a good place. So
and for me, like, it never really bothered me. I don't know. And I actually used to get really excited about it. And like, even when people wouldn't ask me, I'd be like, oh, I'm Jamaican Chinese. Like, because I guess we should probably, since I don't think Cepee knows, like our mom is both of our parents are Jamaican, but our mom is Asian. She's Chinese Jamaican.
Her grandfather was,
and she mostly just presents as Chinese, really. So she's mixed with a lot of things, but she mostly presents as Chinese. So I used to tell people I'm Jamaican Chinese, and I would just say it like, and I would get so excited about it, and even I would have people who would be like, that's weird, or not that's weird, but they'd just be like, oh, that's different. Like, I've never seen that before, and I feel like they didn't quite know how to accept it or how to handle it, but I was so proud of it. I don't know. So I always just was really happy about it. I was never really bothered. And then now it's evolved where, like, I'm not just volunteering information anymore, but I still, when people ask, I'm happy to say it and to kind of explain. And now I even try and probably give too much information. I'm like, so this is how Chinese people got to Jamaica, because I know you're wondering. So I don't know. It's always been, it's never been something that I've been irritated by. I think like you, like I've always kind of seen it as people are asking because they really genuinely want to know, and not some malicious intent behind it. So yeah. I don't know.
Nothing really surprises me with culture. I think that's been the beautiful part about being Jamaican descent and just in being around a lot of cultures, that a lot of people think, Jamaicans only look like this, right? Like black with
Yes.
dreadlocks or something, right? And,
Yeah.
Bob Marley, whatever.
Right.
That's like what they
Yeah.
think, if I'm being honest. But it's like, no, there's such a vast thing. So like nothing surprised me. I hear like Iranian, Colombian. I was like, cool.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's awesome. Like, yeah, I don't see that combo a lot, but it doesn't, it doesn't surprise me. So I think nothing, that's just one of the kind of the great parts about doing these interviews is hearing all the mixtures and stuff. Whereas I think people can sometimes think it's only one way. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. There's like infinite possibilities, right?
Yeah.
Oh, so one question we do like to ask, especially for people who have two parents from different backgrounds, is there one culture that you feel more like you connected with more than the other?
Oof, yes. I've thought about this and I just don't know. I think it really depends maybe on the context, who I'm with, right? Because I feel like my identity feels fluid in many ways in terms of culture. Like, as I mentioned at the beginning, I never feel enough of anything. Like, I think American culture is my dominant because that's where I grew up. But then I also had, the infusion of my dad's Persian culture and his values and way of beliefs, and my mom's Colombian. I mean, although my mother grew up in the U.S., she grew up a very strict household, and like her sisters were her best friends, and they spoke Spanish with her mom. So she grew up in a very Colombian household. So my mother, had a lot of Colombian culture she was bringing to the table. So I feel like I grew up equally with both sides, but I don't feel 100% any. And I think there's different situations where I'll feel one or the other. I think I'm a very much an extroverted person. So when I'm feeling that and I'm feeding off people's energy, I really feel like that's my mom and my Colombian side coming out. But sometimes I can be quite, I don't want to say logical because my mother was logical too, but she was also very fiery. So sometimes when I'm just more, I don't know, calmer or just more observant, I feel like I'm more like my father's side of the family. But I really think it depends. I will say in terms of curiosity now as an adult, for me, I mean, I love going to Latin America, but I think right now what draws me more is the Middle East. And I've been fortunate to spend time in other countries there outside of Iran. And there's just something about it that just like awakens my soul and makes me feel very connected to even other cultures. I mean, Iranians are not Arab, but even being in Arab countries, I just feel very much kind of at peace there. And there's a sense of a belonging. So the Middle East attracts me a lot more right now. But I don't know if that's just like right now, maybe next decade, it's going to be more Latin American. Who knows?
Yeah. That's very cool. And since you visited both countries, another thing we've kind of talked to with guests is that like sometimes when you visit, your parents' country, your relatives and stuff are very quick to point out that like, the American, or how you don't relate, even though sometimes you feel like you said, it's the first time someone pronounced my name properly, like and you kind of feel a little bit of that, like, this is home. It's funny how sometimes relatives can be like,
cut you down.
Yeah.
They let you know.
Yeah, they let you know. No.
That's true. And even, I think, when I went to Iran, a lot of the cousins that I met there have since then moved to the U.S. So they moved to the U.S. as adults. And I think before, growing up, even now, I'll say, I'm Iranian, Colombian, but when I'm with those Iranian cousins, like it feels weird to say I'm Iranian because they're like real Iranians. Like I didn't grow up there. I don't speak the language. So there's even all of that kind of like, I don't know if the word is, it's not shame. What is the word there? It's just not feeling like enough sometimes. And like what constitutes you being a part of that culture? Like I have that kind of like identity crises with my culture sometimes. Like, can I even say that? Am I enough? I don't know enough of the language or I don't know enough about the culture. So I don't know that they have, going back to like them cutting you down. I don't think it was them cutting me down. It was just like me feeling inferior in a way to them.
It's kind of how we came up with the whole name of the podcast. This is like, you don't quite feel like you resonate with your parents' culture, but then sometimes in America, it's very obvious that you're different from maybe the majority. So it's like, where am I in between all this?
Yeah, no, I remember
Definitely.
I had like a family friend who I forgot something that there was some like Jamaican food I didn't like or something, and I mentioned it to him, and he was like, "Oh, you're not really Jamaican," and it like hurt me. I was like, "No, yes, I am. Like, what am I? What am I if I'm not Jamaican?" It's like, you do kind of have this crisis sometimes with things like that. So, no, I definitely feel that. something I wanted to ask, and it's just a lot of the guests that we've had that have different cultures in their household, they're kind of similar. Like the cultures that are there are kind of similar. But in your case, I feel like, at least on the outside looking in, you generally think Iran is quite different from Colombia. So was there any kind of like cultural clash like within your household of of just those two cultures? Was it ever like something that, I don't know, was there ever something that just didn't kind of mix sometimes between your parents and where they've come from?
Yeah, it's hard to sometimes say if it's culture
Yeah.
or just my family culture,
Yeah.
right? Where
Yeah.
they came
That's a good
from. And
point.
I try to think about that, and I talk to other Persians and Colombians to try to like get to the root of it, because I think in one way it was like a perfect blend. When people, when you think about it on paper, maybe it's very different, but there was a lot of overlap, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I want to talk about like where it didn't work.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think, the generalization or maybe a stereotype of Latin people is like, they're very open, warm. Also, they share, they're talking about everything all the time. And my mother came from a family of, she had many sisters. She had one brother, but a lot of sisters. And so, they're talkers. They share. When they're mad, you know it. When they have a problem, they'll tell you. My father grew up with a lot of brothers, one sister and many brothers. And so my father was more about saving face, like you would just wouldn't know if something was bothering him, if something was wrong. And I don't know if that was like him and his brother things or more Persian culture, which I think in a bit it's Persian culture. So that's where my parents, when I would notice they would clash, as my mom would get very frustrated that my father wouldn't talk about things, share his emotions. And she just did not like that. And that would always start like the fight, right? Like she wanted to talk things out. If something was bothering her, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So I think different communication styles was always like a point of what is the word?
Contention.
Let me snap. Yes, contention. Thank you. But where it did work very well was, I mean, I think most cultures, people say like, well, they're family oriented. But yes, my parents are very family oriented, want to spend time with family. But also these were cultures that love to gather and love to party and love to dance. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Persian music, especially like Persian pop music, there are so many dance tunes. Latin music, as we know, is very danceable. So that was something when families would get together, like just the two sides would mesh beautifully. And also my parents' siblings met each other when they were teenagers. So like both sides of my families kind of grew up together, all of my aunts and uncles on both sides. So getting together was just so much fun. Even our Thanksgivings, and my white American friends would love to come to our Thanksgivings. It wasn't just eating dinner. It was like, okay, the dinner is one thing, but after the dinner, that's when we like open up the dance floor in the living room and they are playing Latin music, Persian music, and dancing till like the wee hours. And so that was really beautiful. I think the cultures of just, really wanting to gather and express joy together through dance and eating and all of that meshed very well.
Awesome. That sounds like a good time.
Yeah. I wish I was there. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That sounds like fun. So one thing with immigrants, a lot of times, I don't want to generalize, but like, is that a lot of times they like very structured jobs, I should say, like doctor, teacher, lawyer, engineer, jobs that at least my mom was like, those are the only options we had. And that sometimes we have too many options here in America, is what she has told my sister and I one time. How has it been for you, being an entrepreneur, like, venturing out into these kind of things where, you're kind of paving your own path? Were your parents very accepting of you kind of doing this, traveling abroad, doing all these things, forming your community? Like, how has that been?
Oh my gosh. So my father was just how you said, like there are certain options and paths you follow, but none of them were ones that I wanted to follow. So it was a struggle. I started traveling quite young. When I was 17 was my first trip abroad. And then in my 20s, I was just chasing travel the whole time, and career was a second. And my father did not like that at all. But I was funding my own lifestyle. So they, at a certain point, were like, if you're going to do this, you pay for it. We're not going to pay for that, but that's you. But there was always that pressure, more from my father than my mother. My mother was actually very supportive of me going abroad and kind of enjoying my life, to the point also they would tell me like, wait to get married, have kids, which is not always so typical of immigrant parents. And I think because they, got married and had me quite young. But it was a struggle with my father to try to pave my own path because, he had certain expectations that were much more conventional than how I wanted to live my life. And so we did butt heads on that quite a bit. And I just didn't fit into the box. And unfortunately, at the time that I was going to college and doing things, there weren't a lot of options that, that weren't conventional and that you can make a living as there are now. But I will say, I mean, my parents, unfortunately, they passed away in 2010, 2011.
Sure.
And that's when, I was still trying to live up to their expectations in a way and still trying to have that 9 to 5 and all of that. But in a way, I mean, not that I don't even know the right way to say this, not the silver lining, because I don't like to think of it like a silver lining that they passed. That sounds so awful. But I think one of the gifts in their passing was that weight of trying to live up to their expectations was lifted. I kind of felt like I had the freedom, after I went through the grieving process and I could like kind of see the light of getting back to my life, that I could do what I wanted to do because I didn't have that pressure from them anymore. And so that's when I started choosing to do my own thing. And I felt okay to do that and free to do that. And almost in a way, like I had their blessing to do that because they passed away quite young. And I feel like they would probably want me to live a life that I wanted to live. And so there's been a lot of freedom in going through that grief. And now, paving my own way. I think they would be proud of me now. And it's so beautiful that their siblings, I spent a lot of time with my aunts and uncles, always tell me like your parents would be so proud of you and what you've done. But I don't think, and I often think about this, I don't know that I would have gone down this path had they still been alive. I just don't know that I would have felt free enough to kind of disappoint them and go, and take a different path. Even if it would have led to success, I still would have felt that pressure from them. So
thank you for being so vulnerable there. I didn't know I was going to, I felt a little bad asking like, oh no, I didn't mean to open up all that stuff. But no, that's very interesting. And thank you for sharing that. I think we all, I describe it as like an innate indebtedness to them a little bit from especially our parents come a poorer country, they sacrificed a lot for you to tell us a lot how they had no money when they came here and all this stuff. And Brianna and I were able to live a nice middle-class life and all that. And so you feel almost like, okay, Brianna and I were both in the arts and I did not pursue it, but Brianna did pursue music a little bit. And it's like, you feel a little bit like, oh my gosh, like if I don't make it or something, or it's, letting them down. And so, so we understand that.
Yeah, no, like you said, and don't feel bad. I mean, I'm open to talk about this because I think it's important that, people kind of hear, just what life is about. Life is not easy and things happen that are out of our control. And I think it's important to talk about that. But of course, like you said, our parents sacrificed so much to give us a better life. And sometimes when we feel like we're not taking advantage of that opportunity in the way that they, envision for us, it definitely can leave those feelings of inadequacy, disappointment. And that's hard. I think, especially when parents, especially the previous generations, there were only certain paths to success. And so it is also a struggle to understand that there may be other ways that we can pursue success on our terms.
Yeah. I mean, I think that just for me personally, like that's something that I'm going through right now is trying to kind of figure out how to just not be as worried about disappointing my mother, especially, and just kind of trying to come into my own, live my own life. I'm turning 30 soon. So I'm like, okay, I'm at a point where like, I need to not be as worried about what she thinks about what I'm trying to do and just kind of, start my own path and,
easier said than done.
But it's much. You would think like, oh, okay, I'm this age now. I'm like do my own thing, but it's just so hard because you do always want to make them proud, and no matter what age you are. So I think that's a path that I'm treading right now myself. So I totally understand that.
And our mom does not sugarcoat things. You know what she's feeling. It's not sweetie, you should do. It's not like that.
She tells you like it is. That's scary,
it is,
right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
At least you know where you stand with her.
That is true.
It's good.
Totally. No, my mom was the same way. But I think of course, it's another generalization, but with immigrant parents, there is a sense of ownership over the lives of their children that's a little different than American culture and parents, right? Like they still have input and we still feel like we have to not disappoint them. Well into our 30s and beyond, we're still kind of trying to live up to that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I have one more question before we go into our little lighthearted section that we do at the end. And I'm really interested to hear your answer on this because, as you mentioned at the beginning, you live in Spain now and you've lived there for quite a while now. So you would probably consider yourself an immigrant. And has becoming an immigrant yourself altered your view of your parents' immigrant experience at all? What is that like?
Interesting. I like that question.
Yes, that's an interesting question. Yes, it has. I mean, my immigrant journey is very different from theirs. I'm a very privileged immigrant. I came here by choice because I wanted to, because I could kind of look at a menu of visas and pick one of the country I wanted to move to. A little different than my parents. So I have an insight to a certain degree because I came here kind of just for fun. And that's not why they moved to the US. But just going through certain things on my journey, I think the number one is learning the language learning. I've had so much insight and so much more respect for people who have to navigate life in a language that is not their mother tongue and people who do it well, even when they have an accent. Incredible. I've been here 8 years. I speak Spanish very well, but I would not say I'm not fluent. I'm not myself in Spanish the way my parents were in their second language. I just think back at, oh my God, that's incredible that they were able to achieve that. So language learning has definitely given me an insight into the struggle of becoming completely fluent and just navigating a whole new system. And in a way, I mean, also I came here of choice and I go back to the US a lot to visit. I don't miss the US so much, but it does give me an insight into being far away from home and family. My father left and there was, maybe 15, 20 years that passed that he didn't see some of his brothers. And he only saw his parents every few years when they would come to visit. It was 15, 20 years till he had gone back to Iran. So I just think about that. Like, what would it be like if I couldn't go back to the US for 15, 20 years? Like, that would drive me insane. Like, I would want to just feel the connection, even if I don't want to live there.
Yeah.
Just like be there and, just, I don't know, be around that part of my culture. So yeah, I've just maybe thought of things that I wasn't really aware of before. And also just have just understand maybe better also other immigrants that live here that aren't so privileged that come to Spain and kind of see how they're able to create a whole life from scratch. Like that can feel kind of simple when you're coming from a very privileged place. But when everything's riding on that and you are trying to create a better life for yourself and your family, like the amount of courage and tenacity and determination that takes, I don't think I'll ever understand that, but definitely have even more respect for people who do that.
Wonderful. Well, we're reaching our home stretch here. We're gonna go into our ending segment, which is just some fun questions. And my first question here, I know it can be a bit of a difficult one. Alyssa always tells me this is probably too hard of a question, but maybe you have some fun answers. We want to know if you have a favorite expression from your parents' countries.
Oh, yeah, that is a hard one. Okay, let me think.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Or
I
saying, right? Expression or
Yeah,
saying.
any saying. It can be like just a little one word thing. Yeah.
Well, I do love in Farsi, they say azizam as a word of endearment, a term of endearment. I can't remember the literal translation, but it's like my dear, my love, my life, something like that. And I love it when my family says that to me, like azizam. And I would say a second thing they say in Farsi is when they say someone's name, sometimes they'll add the to the ending, they'll add June or John. So like Cepee June or Alyssa June. And it's another term of endearment, which just makes my heart melt when someone says that to me. It just makes me feel like a little 5-year-old being like cuddled by my grandparents. So sweet.
Oh, that's a great answer.
Yeah. See.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. So another fun one we'd like to ask is, what are some favorite foods that you like to eat in each country?
Yes. Well, my grandmother would always make quite simple dish, but I loved it. She would just make rice and black beans and then kind of smashed fried plantains called tostones in Colombia. That was my favorite dish of hers. So that I could eat every day. And then Iranian dish, my favorite is called fesinjun, and it's a stew made of like pomegranate juice and walnuts. And it's usually made with chicken, but I'm a vegetarian. So now my aunt makes it with mushrooms. And it is just so, so delicious and such a unique flavor that I haven't tasted anywhere else.
Yeah, I've actually heard of fesinjun.
Oh my gosh.
Well, it's so funny. Like, I don't know if you know of Bobby Flay, the show on like Food Network. Yeah, so one of the, Amanda, what was her name? I can't remember her last name. One of the chefs, Amanda, she made it as like she's like, I know Bobby's not going to know what this is, but she phrased it as like I think a Turkish dish or something maybe. Anyway, but yeah, it was so she made that. I like never had heard of it, and she beat him with.
Oh my gosh! So I gotta find that episode.
Yeah, so I've actually heard of it. So that's funny. Very
cool.
Yeah,
that is really cool.
Very neat.
Nice. Another question. We haven't asked this one in a while, actually. Do you have like a happy place in each country?
I don't know that I do. I feel like I haven't spent enough time to have that happy place. I mean, when I think of Iran and like a place that I would love to go back to is what I talked about earlier, just my grandmother's apartment. I don't know. It was just so cute to see her. I mean, she was a widow, but she had her little life set up and her little like radio with her CDs and her little pictures. And oh my God, it just was like the cutest little thing to see her living her little life there. So maybe that would be a happy place if I went to Iran. But yeah, I don't know that I've spent enough place to really have that happy place.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. And I think
maybe one more.
Yeah. Well, lastly, we just like to add, what do you love the most about each culture?
Well, for Latin culture, I mean, I just admire so much how much they wear their emotions on their sleeves. Like that, especially Colombian culture, such a joyous culture. It is so beautiful. If, for anyone who goes there, you just see joy in the streets. I love that everybody knows how to dance. I did not get that. That skipped this generation. But they're incredible dancers. Yes. And with my family, anytime any beat comes on, people are up and dancing. And it's just so beautiful to be so free. I just love that about Latin culture. I feel like there's something that, even though I'm half Latin, there's so much that I can embrace and learn about my own culture. Sometimes I'm a bit reserved, which I feel comes like from my Persian side sometimes. But what I love about Persian culture is how welcoming it is. Oh my gosh, people will bend over backwards to make you feel comfortable the moment you walk in their house. Also, something that I very much admire and try to incorporate also when I have guests over, I kind of think like, what would my dad do? What would my grandmother do? Of just like making people feel like they are zero burden at all in any sense. I think it's so beautiful.
Well, thank you so much, Cepee, for being here. This really was an honor to get to talk to you. I've admired your work for so long, and I've admired you for so long. So it's so nice to virtually meet you and to talk to you. We just wanted to ask if you wanted to kind of share where people can find you before we go.
Yes. Well, first of all, just thank you so much for having me on. This has been one of my favorite podcasts and guest appearances. This has been so fun to be able to talk about these things that are so meaningful. So thank you so much also for creating the space for other people to share, of us being here in between. For anyone who is interested in moving abroad, you can find me on Instagram at She Hit Refresh. If you need resources, our website, we're on YouTube. Find us on all the socials there. Reach out if you have any questions. I would love to connect. And if you need help moving abroad, we have a lot of resources to help you do that.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you so much, Cepee. Thank you.